Hello, BookTube. It's early May, and as you've seen in your subscription feed, that means booktubers are making TBRs, where they hold up their hopes and dreams for what they're going to read in the month of May. It doesn't really work on my channel. I'm really hoping to read the major new releases in a dozen different genres from all the major publishing houses in America in the month of May, which doesn't really work for holding up on camera. So what I tend to do on this channel is a TBR BY, a to be read by you, where I make 10 recommendations for books that are coming out in May that I've already read and that I can wholeheartedly recommend to you. Sort of the video equivalent of if we were walking around in a bookstore's new release section and you saw something and wondered, if it was worth your time. So I have a list, and I want to go through it with you now. And it kind of sort of breaks down by category. I'll warn you ahead of time, something you already know from watching this channel, which is that there's not a lot of fiction on this list. I'm sure that I will read a lot of fiction. I intend to read every major fiction release that comes out in the month of May, or have already done so. But in terms of recommendations, I love the nonfiction more. So we'll start off with fiction. Starting off not just with fiction, but with romance. And not just romance, but Regency romance. I love Regency romance. And I was kind of surprised at the romance reading that I've done so far for May. Most of the books that I've really enjoyed have not been historical, much less Regency. But there is a Regency that I can recommend. I think it's the first of a series, the Misadventures in Matchmaking series by Vivienne Lorret. It's called How to Forget a Duke, and it's about the Bourne matrimonial agency whose ladies, their job is to pair worthy women with entitled men. And the number one rule of the agency is don't fall in love with the clients, because that would ruin everything. And the heroine of How to Forget a Duke knows that perfectly well, and she has a duke in mind and a match in mind when an accident happens that gives her temporary amnesia. So she doesn't know that she's not supposed to fall in love with the client. And I know what you're thinking. That is the hackneyest of all hackneyed plot devices. And, of course, that's not how amnesia works. But it's a literary convention, right? It's not just a medical condition. It's also a literary convention. When's the last time you read Cancer done convincingly in a novel? There's a literary version of Cancer in addition to a real-world version of Cancer. Same thing with amnesia. And despite the groan-inducing contrivance, Vivienne Lorret does a great job of bringing these two personalities together, the Duke and this poor amnesiac woman who may remember more than she thinks she does. So I just found it delightful. If it is the first in a series, I hope she continues with it. And the other fiction entry on this list, I'm afraid there are only two. And the other one is also light as could be. It's basically summer reading a month early. And it's something we've seen on this channel before. It's The High Tide Club by Mary Kay Andrews, which is, her publisher is already pushing her as the queen of beach reads, and it certainly looks that. It's got sunglasses and a beach bag and sand and whatnot on the cover. But we've seen it. I've described it on this channel before. There's more meat on its bones than that. I was kind of surprised by, I was kind of surprised, among other things, by the almost total lack of romance in the book. It has other things on its mind. It has other things to do. It's the story of a 99-year-old millionaire recluse who summons a young lawyer to her because she's dying and she wants to make amends to the people in her past, including the members of the High Tide Club from 50 years ago. But she has wheels within wheels in terms of motivation, and all sorts of mysteries come to light. And it ended up pleasing me on more levels. I mean, I love Mary Kay Andrews, but I only love her in the way that you love a nice tall, cool glass of lemonade on the back porch on a warm summer day, and this had more to it than that. So I recommend them both. I recommend both those novels, even though they're not literary fiction. And then we'll move on to nonfiction. And we'll start with two books that are connected. A lot of my nonfiction recommendations this month are connected in pairs. I don't know why. But the first two are about energy. And the first one is actually called Energy. It's by Richard Rhodes, a great science historian and narrative historian who wrote The Making of the Atom Bomb and a bunch of other books. And this is about mankind's long history with energy, mankind's long involvement with energy of all kinds. And Rhodes just does a fantastic job of it, telling the stories, underscoring, connecting threads that you might not have thought of, certainly that I didn't think of. And naturally, when he gets to the end of his story, one of the forms of energy that he spends a great deal of time with is atomic energy, his own specialty, and the subject of the second book, nonfiction book that I want to recommend about energy, which is Chernobyl by Serhii Plokhy, which it's a new history of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the worst nuclear disaster in human history. And this author, as far as I know, has never written a bad book. And this one certainly isn't. It's just terrific. It takes you into the minute-by-minute history of the tragedy, into the minute-by-minute lives of the people who were affected by it, displaced by it, killed by it, and also into the minute-by-minute reaction of the Soviet state, which was torn between two conflicts. On the one hand, the humanitarian impulse to tell the rest of the world about this enormous amount of radiation that has been vented into the atmosphere and is headed towards you. And on the other hand, the old Soviet state impulse to compartmentalize information, to restrict the flow of information, especially to prohibit the dissemination of information that makes the state look bad. There isn't a dull page anywhere in it. It's just, if you remember when Chernobyl was in the news, then you have to read this book. And even if you're too young to remember that, it's still a vital problem in your life, right? I mean, Fukushima was in all our lives. And it's not done, and neither is the story of Chernobyl done. So I highly recommend it, even though it's a somber subject. Then we'll do biography. We'll do two biographies, and they also share something in common. I guess you could say royalty at war, in a way. Royalty at war. One of them is a book we've seen on this channel before, and I just want to sing its praises because it's so good. It's The Black Prince by Michael Jones, which is just the latest, and it's the latest narrative biography of the eldest son of King Edward III, a legendary warrior, legendary strategist, legendary leader of men, a legendary patron of the arts and whatnot, from the Middle Ages. And his story, his life story, is larger than life and was once more popular with biographers and with readers than it is now. But even so, even if he's slightly fallen out of the limelight, this still makes tremendous reading, and Michael Jones does a great job of it. And the other royal at war is the opposite end of the spectrum. No one has ever, I don't think anyone has ever included him in a romantic novel of any kind. And as far as I know, this is his first full-length English language biography. The book is unfortunately called Haig's Enemy, which is, burying the lead. But it's by Jonathan Boff, and it's about Crown Prince Rupert from World War I, one of the lead warriors and strategists for the German side of World War I. And the book brings him completely to life. The amount of research that must have gone into making this thing is amazing. And it spills over not just the oversized personality of the prince himself, but also of everybody around him. And blows apart the typical knee-jerk depiction of the German side of World War I as being this sort of bloated, complacent, inertial thing that didn't do or think much or care much, and that was mostly fighting the last war. This blows that apart. Of course, the German side, like the Allied side, was intensely occupied with wanting to win, and were trying to be innovative towards that end. And the Crown Prince becomes the center of that story in a way that I really didn't expect it to be this effective. Of course, he had a lot on the line and ended up losing a lot. Lost his kingdom, lost his son. And the story is just wonderful. I don't know how good Oxford University Press is at distributing its titles in America. I'm not sure that in the month of May, if you walked into a bookstore, you would see this thing. And that, if not, that would be a shame. But it is, I checked, and it is not just their scholarly arm. This is general distribution. So even if your bookstore doesn't have it, they can order it, and your library certainly can. And I very much recommend it. And if you are a student of the First World War, you have to have this book. No one's ever done it before. So, while we're on the subject of world wars and books you have to have, I can mention a bit of history. Craig Symonds' book, World War II at Sea, which looks very staid and very somber, and which sounds it. Certainly the subject of World War II was a mostly naval conflict, and has the naval side of it has been written a million times. So when I went into this thing, I was thinking, okay, well, even if you're not staid and stodgy, you'll still be fairly derivative, and I was blissfully surprised. It's just terrific. It's just a terrific narrative history of the greatest naval war in history, and it prompts me to say the same kind of thing that I would say about Haig's Enemy, which is that if you're a fan of World War II, or if you know one, then this is a must book. It's a must-have book, even though, you know, the subject has been written many, many times. This is still a superb example of that. And then we'll move away from history for just a minute to nature, because there was a weird book by Isabella called Wilding that I want to recommend. I don't know what its distribution in America will be like, but it's the story of a husband and wife team who buy a farm in, I think, West Sussex, England. And it has been poorly managed and overfarmed, and they at first have all sorts of ideas about what they want to do about that. And then they decide on the riskiest idea of all, which is to pull back completely. They say, let's not do anything. Let's just leave these acres alone and see what happens. And when I was reading it, I was thinking, okay, well, you know, hares and a few scrubby grasses will creep back in, but that's not what happens at all. Instead, the natural world rushes back in profusion. Species that had been farmed or hunted out of the area return almost immediately and in huge numbers. And that story takes on a life of its own apart from farming or adventures in farming, and makes Wilding just an amazing book. So I highly recommend it. I don't know how easy it'll be for you to see it, but I highly recommend it. And then I want to finish up with two general works of nonfiction. Both of them are a little meaty, both of them are a little steep, both of them are not summer reads, but they are well worth your time. They are landmark studies in the popular imagination of their subjects. The first one is by Serhii, and it's called The Known Citizen. And it's a history of privacy in America, but really by extension in the entire world. And very much concerned with the present. I mean, yes, it's a history of what privacy has been, and how it's been assaulted, how it's been conceived, but it's very much about the present, because the 21st century is all about privacy. Is it any kind of a meaningful concept anymore, for instance? And if it is it a commodity that is yours to buy and sell? And all sorts of stuff like that. And the author does a wonderful job of just exploring the complexities of a very complex subject. So it's not a beach read, but I do very much recommend it. Same thing with the last book on our list for today, which is She Has Her Mother's Laugh by Carl Zimmer. A big fat book about heredity and genetics, about what they are, what they aren't, about how people misconceive them, about the wonders and the discoveries that have been made about them. And as a large, thoughtful, soup-to-nuts study of a medical subject, I would rank it right up there with The Emperor of All Maladies. It's a fantastic book. I hope it does well when it appears in May. And if you see it, and the subject at all interests you, and of course it's one of those rare subjects that actually influences all of us, I highly recommend it, either at your library or at your bookstore or whatever. And that is it. That is my May 2018 TBR BY. And I didn't put any pictures up here because none of my technology is behaving. I don't even know if this video is going to record. But if it does, I will certainly put a list down below so that you at least have, you can cut and paste what I've been talking about. I don't have anything to show you. But I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I will be back and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.